We find ourselves now in Daniel chapter 5. And this chapter is a little bit longer, but honestly, there's not as much detail to go through. And so we've got some group questions. We're going to get back a little bit to our study groups this evening, so we'll be able to pair up and do some talking. There's only 3 questions for the group, but they're ones that I think are very, very pertinent for the world we're living in right now. And I would really encourage you guys to do some very honest thinking and talking tonight. And I think we're going to walk away with some really, really helpful information and encouragement. So the last couple chapters have been different opportunities where God has taken the Babylonian Empire and grabbed their attention and communicated with its leadership in such a way that nobody else could help the leadership understand until a man of God stepped in. And so everybody knew without a shadow of a doubt, these are messages from God. And for the last couple chapters, Nebuchadnezzar has been the focus, and God chipping away and chipping away and chipping away at this guy's prideful heart. And I really believe it's because God looks down, sees the truth deep down inside of us, and sees potential. And he sees willingness. Now, Nebuchadnezzar being the top dog of the biggest empire of the world, he has a massive ego. But down at the bottom of it, going through these lessons changed him. And that was incredible. And God sees that potential. Now, sadly, his grandson, who may very well be his grandson, had the ego but did not have the teachable heart. So, same scenario he's in, very different ending. But there's a lot of history that goes through it. So before we start reading in chapter 5, just a little historical note here. The book of Daniel does not record all the Babylonian rulers of Daniel's day. Until recently, some of these rulers, i.e. Darius, or Darius, depending on how you want to pronounce that, they were disbelieved by contemporary historians. While recent archaeological discoveries have validated their existence, certain specifics have yet to be clarified. So here's a list of all the rulers that secular history has actually put together. And I'll be honest with you, these numbers are not hard and fast. There could be anywhere from 1 to 5 years fluctuation in between. It was kind of a nightmare for the last couple of days just trying to get down specifics because it depends on which resource you're looking at. But it gets close enough to know very well Nebuchadnezzar II. This is actually not Nebuchadnezzar the first. He was a long time before Nebuchadnezzar II. Right after his reign, and he was a major, major proponent of truly building the Babylonian Empire to the greatness that it had. Right after his rule, Amel-Marduk took over for about a year and a half. And then after him, Nergal-Glisser, man, I'm sure I'm butchering these names, took over for about 3 years. And then Labasi-Marduk, 556 to 556. This guy didn't even last a year as the empire ruler. And then after him, Nabonidus. So we have like a 3-year period, 4-year period where the Babylonian Empire is just scrambling for a solid leader. Nebuchadnezzar was so strong, so authoritative. He did a great job. So filling big shoes was rather difficult, and these guys were trying, not working out real well. Until Nabonidus takes over in 556. Now, it got really confusing to say, all right, well, who is next? I thought, according to the Bible, I'm reading Nebuchadnezzar, goes straight to Belshazzar. Well, Daniel is only highlighting certain rulers. These guys were in between. And actually, Belshazzar, which is the blank that you have next, Nabonidus was co-ruled with Belshazzar. So history is kind of trying to figure out the definites here. It is said that Nabonidus is actually Nebuchadnezzar II's son. That may be true through Nebuchadnezzar's wife. But Nabonidus had a son named Belshazzar. The two of them were co-rulers. Now, why would you want to be a co-ruler? Why would you want to share the throne with your son? Interesting how it works out. Nabonidus was not a really good leader. In fact, religiously, he wanted to get away from the main god of the Babylonians. He grabbed one of the lesser gods, I believe it was the moon god, and he really started to emphasize worship for that god. Well, that was getting the Babylonian leadership really ticked off. And so Nabonidus says, fine, I'm just going to go over into my own little desert paradise for the next 10 years, and I'm just going to worship my moon god. I'm going to leave my son in control, Belshazzar. Now, he's not king, but I'm going to give him a lot of authority. So these guys are kind of a mess. He's got the biggest empire in the world, and he wants to go sit in the desert and do his own thing, and just leaves his son in control. So Belshazzar's trying to do a good job, but he's only in there for a short number of years. He tries, but he's got the ego, but not the experience, shall we say, because right at the end of 539, you have the Persian Empire growing and growing, and now they're knocking on the door of the Babylonian borders. And we have Cyrus the Great in control of the Persian Empire. He's combined with the Medo or Medes Empire as well. Those two link up, and they said, nope, Babylonians are pretty weak. Let's take them over. And they do exactly that. While Nabonidus is out in the desert doing his thing, and Belshazzar's kind of weak ruler in Babylon, they walk in, have a big battle in, in Opis. The Medo-Persian Empire, or their army, rolls the Babylonians, totally defeats them at Opis, and then Cyrus the Great walks into Babylon, literally to the cheers of the Babylonian people. Thank you so much for conquering our empire. You will do a better job than these bums that are sitting out in the desert or just trying to do their best. So it's fascinating when you start to do a lot more historical research to read between the lines. Now, obviously, that's not important for what's going on here in the book of Daniel, but I find it fascinating because when you start to line up biblical facts, and he's like, well, there's a gap. Oh, no, there's a gap. Somebody's going to look at that and say, see, the Bible's not historically accurate. It's absolutely accurate. You just do a little bit of research and you fill in the gaps like, oh, this lines up perfectly, even all the way down to Darius's age when he takes over in 539 BC. We'll get to that in a few minutes because Darius and Cyrus, I got really confused with these two guys until the historical background made a lot of sense, but we'll get there at the end of the lesson. So let's look at chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. Excuse me. And let's set up the situation because Nebuchadnezzar is now out of the picture, and for the most part, Daniel's actually out of the picture. We're going to see some interesting details in a few minutes. Verse 1 of chapter 5, book of Daniel says, Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar, that's another way of saying his grandfather, had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem. And the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. So we see that wine celebrations were an exclusive event in Daniel's day and culture. Remember, he's in basically Persia. If you're thinking right at the border between Iraq and Iran, that's the region of the world we're working with. So an Eastern culture. If we look just a couple of decades down the road in the book of Esther, chapter 5, and Esther chapter 7, we see that Queen Esther used such a setting, a wine feast, to make a personal petition to the Persian king Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes I, decades later. So Esther 5:12 says, Haman said, moreover, Yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared, but myself. And tomorrow am I invited unto her also with the king. So these wine feasts were very exclusive inner circle kind of parties. Very, very big deal. So Daniel chapter 8, verse 1, and secular historical research agree that Belshazzar had been given rule for 7 years. I'd read a commentary that said, Belshazzar is probably commemorating his ascension to the throne. Well, you start to do the math on the dates. Like, no, this guy's been ruling for a couple of years. Daniel chapter 8, verse 1 says, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto Daniel. So Belshazzar has actually been ruling for a number of years. So this was not a coronation party at all. We don't exactly know what the party was for, but we know, according to history, he had been ruling anywhere from this 3-year point up until year 10, probably right on year 10, about 539 BC. Now, as far as looking at exactly what he did, number one, it would be disrespectful to furnish a binge drinking party using cups that were particularly dedicated to God's temple. That is amazingly disrespectful. But then you take it a step further, and when they went to use those vessels to toast the gods of silver, gold, wood, hay, all these other foolish things, that is declaring to the world that those false gods are better than the gods that we're using to toast with, because these cups belong to Jehovah, God of Israel, and we are toasting a greater God than him. So whether they're just trying to furnish the party with some bling so everybody is seeing the riches of Babylon, really doesn't matter, because what they are doing has significance, especially in the eyes of God. This is incredibly disrespectful. In fact, it pushed everything right to the tipping point. So your next blank, your words and actions will reveal your level or your lack of respect. It's very interesting to note that Jesus addressed how the things that we say, the things that we do, have an origin in our hearts particularly. In Matthew chapter 15, verse 18 to 20, verse 18 says, "But those things which proceeded out of the mouth come forth from the heart. They defile the man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornication, thefts, false witness," and it goes on with a litany of physical sins. Well, folks, where does the physical sin come from? It comes from the heart. People think, well, the words come from the mind. No, this is pretty much the place where everything comes, right out of your heart. So when people are disrespectful, you know it's actually a heart issue. That's what it is. When people have a problem with their words, it's actually a heart issue. Like, I just need to be more disciplined with my tongue. Well, if you had a heart change, that would help your discipline with your tongue. That would help your actions. So as much as we like to excuse ourselves or blame issues on other things, it comes down to our hearts. It's really what the core issue is. And the disrespect that Belshazzar was displaying had to do with an issue of his heart. It had to do with pride. So we look now at chapter 5, verse 5 and verse 6. At the point that Nebuchadnezzar is having this drunken party and disrespecting God, it says in verse 5, "In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the portion of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another." I'd have to back up for just a moment here. Your next blank. Belshazzar was visually upset. You could tell by his countenance. He was mentally confused and physically shaking. This guy was a mess. So these feasts were supposed to leave the attendees in awe. The riches, the impressiveness of the ruler, But when these guests left this party, they had a totally different view of Belshazzar. This guy is scared out of his mind. He just ticked off the gods. And they literally wrote on the wall, nobody knows what it is, but if we're looking at our king right now, the guy is an absolute mess. He's sitting there trembling. The look on his face, he's probably just white as a ghost. Can't even put a sentence together, shaking uncontrollably. So I find that wonderfully ironic that you're sitting there trying to portray your greatness and you end up looking like a terrified child because of your heart issue causing you to disrespect the true and the living God. Now, verse 7 through verse 9, the king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was the king Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonied. Now, if you remember back in, it's chapter 4, verse 19, Daniel was astonied. He was shocked to the point of being negatively affected. The word here, astonied, is slightly different, but still means shaken up. So basically, Belshazzar goes from the point of being terrified to being completely out of his mind terrified because nobody could help him. It's one thing to be scared and say, get me some help. But then everybody shows up and nobody's able to help, and now you're helpless. You're hopeless. He was a whole nother level of afraid. But right there is a really valuable point. There is a wonderful and powerful value in feeling helpless. Typically, that's something we totally try to avoid, right? But there is value in it. So Belshazzar was a man of incredible means. He was literally top dog in the biggest empire in the world. Yet, he found himself in a place of complete helplessness. So as you look at this in particular, his wealth couldn't buy information. So it's like these advisors come rushing into the room. Belshazzar says, look, I will give you incredible riches. You just need to tell me what this says. And everybody's quiet. And Belshazzar said, look, I will double the reward. Just tell me what this says. And everybody's quiet. It literally doesn't matter how much you pay. We can't help. I mean, it might get to the point where that reward is so high, someone's like, I will make something up just to get the reward. But then you know you're going to get caught. So nobody is willing to risk their life. But it doesn't matter how much you pay if you just can't help. So Belshazzar found out that his wealth was actually useless and powerless. In fact, his resources, all of these men coming in, the best of the best across the empire, they could not figure out a solution. Folks, when we have a problem physically, we try to get the best doctors, at least the best we could afford. If we have a business problem, we try to go to the experts. We have a spiritual problem, we try to find the best counselor, possible. But there comes to a point where nobody has an answer. It doesn't matter. You got the best of the best, and they're still scratching their heads. So his wealth couldn't buy information. His resources couldn't figure out a solution. And even the position that he had as the king couldn't secure peace in his heart. The man was absolutely terrified. And he's the most powerful man in the world. Folks, sometimes we need these kinds of reminders because we get our ego inflated a little bit because we got some money in the bank. We think we can get stuff done because we have position. We think we're able to make progress because of all the resources at our fingertips. But then God puts us in a spot where none of that will do a single thing. Why? Why would God want us to be so helpless at times? Very, very valuable reason. I'm going to challenge you guys to talk about that. Helplessness is a terrible feeling. Why would God ever want people to feel helpless? And knowing you guys, you're going to have a very good reasoned answer for this as you discuss. And I want you to take that principle and then apply it to Romans chapter 5, verse 6. There's a reason God wants us to be helpless. Now let's move on to chapter 5, verse 10. It says, "Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house, and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of thy father, or your grandfather, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him. Whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, I say, thy father made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar, now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. So let's break it up just a little bit and get your first blank. While the male leadership fell apart, and do not be mistaken, this is a very, very male-dominated culture, a clear-thinking woman entered with a wise course of action. I love that. That's wonderful right there. A lady who's like, y'all men are losing your minds. Why don't you just call in Daniel? I mean, he's done this job before, and he's done it real well. Why are y'all scared like this? The queen spake of Daniel's past service. Her words and tone leaned one to think that Daniel had retired or moved to a lesser, more obscure position. The fact that she had to say, hey, this guy that used to work for your grandfather, that used to have this position, he did a really great job in areas just like this, go get him. So it really makes you think. Daniel's not in the same government position he used to hold under Nebuchadnezzar. Well, you go back to our original list on our first sheet, look at all those different rulers that were trying their shot to take Nebuchadnezzar's place. So there was a lot of leadership turnover in the Babylonian Empire, so I'm not surprised at all that Daniel had not retained that position. But now he was being called in. Verse 13, then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? I've even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that the light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing, and make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But they could not show the interpretation of the thing. And I've heard of thee that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now, if thou canst read the writing and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be the third ruler in the kingdom. So I got to thinking, I wonder if Daniel had going through his mind, Lord, this must be your favorite way of getting people's attention. This is the third time you've sent a mysterious message to Babylonian leadership. This is like your favorite, and it's going to work again. So sometimes if you pay attention, you'll notice when God is doing the same thing over again. That ought to encourage you. Like, I have been here before. I think I know what God's up to. I'm going to make sure I learn my lesson. I'm going to make sure I do this one a little more differently than the last time. Or maybe you can even look at something somebody else is going through and say, hey, I don't have all the answers, but God's taken me through something really similar to this. Trust him, or be patient, or I know you don't get it and you're really frustrated, but God has a plan. Do not freak out, okay? Be calm. Do what's wise. You can pass on some of the lesson God's taken you through. Joe.
Seems like always God has to put you on your back so that you're forced to look up.
God put you on your back so you're forced to look up. Yeah. Now with the Babylonian leadership, this is like time number 3. Nebuchadnezzar got it a couple times, and now Belshazzar's going through his own round of it. But this time is a little bit different, and I cannot think enough of Daniel for the way he responds to leadership. This guy is very direct. He does not pull punches. He's not disrespectful, but he also does not candy coat. So he strikes this amazing balance, and God uses him in incredible ways. So let's look at verse 17. And I want to encourage you guys to think about your own ability to speak truth, because this is not easy. Verse 17. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy reward to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O thou king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty, and glory, and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would he slew, and whom he would he kept alive, and whom he would he set up, and whom he would he put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with the grass like oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointed over it whomsoever he will. And thou, his son, O Belshazzar, has not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this, but hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven, and have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives, and thy concubines have drunk wine in them. And thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know. And the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are thy ways, hast thou not glorified? Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. So if we stop right there and back up and just look at this preamble before Daniel gives the answer, boy, did he just give a mouthful. And he did not pull punches. So to summarize the different points of what Daniel said, he said, number 1, I will serve, but I have no desire for reward. That right there would have piqued everybody's interest. That for me, I would put a lot more trust in somebody. If you put a high dollar reward out there, and look, I don't want the reward. I'm going to help you, but I don't want it. If nothing else, that would get my curiosity. But like, if this guy just wants to help but doesn't want the reward, wow, okay, what's going on here? Second, he said, your grandfather was humbled due to his pride. That was the issue. It was a pride problem. Number 3, Nebuchadnezzar learned that my God is sovereign over earthly kingdoms. You know, the God you just disrespected, yeah, that was him. Yeah, you're in trouble. All this situation that Nebuchadnezzar was put through, you knew it, but yet you still have not humbled yourself. This is known history, and it wasn't that long ago that Nebuchadnezzar had gone through that. You know, those rulers in between, that was only like a 3, 4, maybe at most 5-year period between Nebuchadnezzar and when Nabonidus and Belshazzar were ruling. This was known history. For crying out loud, Nebuchadnezzar proclaimed to the empire the details of what happened. So Belshazzar knew this, but he didn't learn his lesson from what happened to his predecessors. There comes a point, folks, where we are held responsible for the things that have happened to the people before us. Well, I didn't know that. Yes, you did. It was right there in the history books. If you're too lazy to pick up the book and read, that's your fault. If you had these stories actually told to you, but you didn't take them seriously, that's your fault. So yes, God does hold us responsible for other people's lessons when those lessons are common knowledge. If we look in the book of Proverbs, chapter 22, verse 3, it says, "A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished." Folks, there are lessons that are right out there and obvious if you know your history, if you pay attention and you learn from other people's mistakes. You can see that stuff coming and realize, I am not going to go through the school of hard knocks over that because I saw somebody go through that. I'm stepping to the side. I'm making different decisions, all that good stuff. So we are, to a degree, held responsible for the things that other people have learned. We just have to pay attention. And Belshazzar did not. And there was no excuse for it. Daniel went on to say, your words and your actions tonight have disrespected the God that holds your next breath in his hands. Whew. Wow, that's truth. Literally every single one of us in this room tonight, if God does not want you to take your next breath, you won't. That is the power that God holds. And at the same time, that is the love that God holds for every single one of us. The reason you've been breathing all day today, and Lord willing, literally, to breathe the rest of the night, is because God's allowing it and desires it. Folks, we have to recognize who God is and recognize our place in that. Belshazzar didn't. Now let's put this in a little more contemporary situation. Belshazzar is the world ruler, right? This guy's amazing power. Nobody else in the world has power like this guy. So what if God put you in a position to stand in front of Vladimir Putin and say, sir, you've screwed up. You have disrespected the God of heaven, and your next breath is in his hand, and he's about to judge you. You're wrong. You are full of pride. How well do you think that would go for you? I mean, gulag may not be just a word that you're trying to spell. It's going to be a word you're going to be living, right? Well, I don't know. Maybe Vladimir Putin wouldn't take you seriously, so who cares? Well, let's pick somebody that's a little more unpredictable. What about if you're sitting in North Korea and you're sitting in front of Kim Jong-un and you're like, you, sir, have a heart full of pride and you have disrespected God and he's about to handle you. You messed up, sir. How do you think that would go for you? I mean, put yourself in a literal situation with a world leader who, if they wanted, could snap their fingers and have you disappeared. That is the situation Daniel's in, real time. It's really easy, folks, for us just to read a familiar Bible story and just say, good job, Daniel. Good job for speaking the truth. But this guy literally is going against the grain to the face of a world emperor. And Daniel could have his life gone in a heartbeat. That is absolutely, that's hero level for me.
You know, I think what you were saying earlier, that he knew the history. You know, Daniel's just pointing out things that he already knew and bringing back to his remembrance. He knew what happened to his daddy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And he goes, that same God's bad to you now.
Yep.
You know, and he knows how his dad responded.
And this guy wasn't. So Daniel, at the end of his preamble, directly points out this message is a direct result of what you have done. Sir, this writing on the wall, your fault. You brought this on yourself. There is no wondering what's going on with the gods. No. You screwed up. This is all on you, sir. So just for a moment, I want you guys to think about, and we'll talk about it in just a little while in your groups. If you could, I messed up my phrasing there, I'm sorry. If you could take one lesson, that's the word, we need the word take in there. If you could take one lesson from the past and sink it deep into the hearts of this current American generation, what would it be? A lesson of the past. What one would you pick? And then as a follow-up question to that, if you could take one lesson from the past and sink it deep into the hearts of this current Christian generation, what lesson would it be? I have a feeling right there we could sit here and talk for hours, but you talk about that later. So let's look at exactly what the writing on the wall was. Verse 25 of Daniel 5 says, and this is the writing that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. 4 words. Daniel said, this is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Okay, so the word there means to count or to number. Verse 27, tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. So the word tekel means to weigh, to stick on a scale, to evaluate. Verse 28, Paris, which is a derivative of the word upharsin. Paris, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. So the word upharsin, the word Paris, means to divide. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, put a chain of gold about his neck, made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the 3rd ruler in the kingdom. Now, these were just words up on a wall, but what symbolism was behind the words? It said of the Aramaic language that you could spell these things out without, and I don't understand the Aramaic language, but you could spell it out with just the consonants and not the vowels. So depending on how you stick the vowels in there is going to determine what the word is. So there's still some ambiguity to like what exactly was written. I see letters up there, but what words exactly are they and what words definition is applying to the situation? There's a lot of confusion and fear. So when Daniel says, well, to count and to number, to weigh and to divide, that's what's on the wall. And very specifically, God has limited the duration of your kingdom, and it's brought it to an end. Belshazzar, time's up. You're done. Time's up. You have been weighed out. God has evaluated you, and you have come up woefully short. That's terrifying. You know, Romans chapter 14, verse 12, let me back up a second here, says, so then every one of us shall give account of himself to God. That used to be a really prominent thought in America. Hey, careful, because you're going to stand before God in judgment someday. And I feel like throughout at least from my childhood up till now, that has largely been thrown into a closet. The whole scary stand before God someday in judgment, that's just kind of an old way of looking at things. Folks, that is so accurate, though. That should scare us, because we are literally going to stand before God in judgment, either for your sin, if you've not put your faith in Christ, or if you have put your faith in Christ, then you're going to stand before God as far as the judgment of your service. Now, that's not the only motivator in life. We do what we do because we love God, but it is a reality that we're going to be held accountable. So this counting, this numbering, this limiting of your life, this truth that everybody has a limited amount of time, and only God knows how much time you have, none of us know. The truth that God weighs out our lives. Everybody will be accurately judged by God. That's a reality we need to grapple with and be motivated by. But then also that last word, to divide. Belshazzar's been told that your kingdom is going to be taken. You're going to be divided from your authority, and your kingdom is going to be cut away and given to somebody else, the Medo-Persian Empire. This was prophesied in the book of Isaiah, I believe is also in the book of Jeremiah. You go back to Isaiah 13, verse 17. Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them. Isaiah chapter 13 is all about a doomsday letter to the empire of Babylon. Behold, I'll stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. Verse 19, and Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, you go to the area right now where Sodom and Gomorrah used to be, it is a barren wasteland where nothing grows. When God threw down fire and brimstone, that brimstone so cooked that area, nothing grows. So now you go to that same area of Babylon today, where this capital area is, look around. Folks, nothing grows. This was a lush, massive, industrious city, and it is literally to this day a wasteland. Everything that God said was going to happen, shocker, happened. So there's a truth. Everyone is subject to God's sovereign control. So this message was definitely to this ruler. Belshazzar's lesson, though, applies to us as well. And we would do very wisely to pay attention. So I'll ask this last question of you guys in your group. Everybody will be judged by God. Unbelievers for eternal judgment. You can look up Matthew 13. There's a parable to that effect, words of Jesus. And Christians for their service. We see that in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 11 through 15. There's another full list of verses that could be used to prove these points biblically. But what's the point of repeating over and over? If your evaluation were tonight, how would you fare? That's a personal question, but one that I want to challenge you to think about tonight. So in closing, verse 30 of Daniel chapter 5 says, in that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So Belshazzar's murder was really not a surprise. We already know from history that he was not a popular ruler, his dad even less so. But he had been left in charge by the derelict and unpopular king Nabonidus. Cyrus the Great, the Persian, and his Medo and Persian generals invaded Babylon, winning the Battle of Opis. Cyrus entered Babylon without a struggle and was greeted as a liberator by welcoming Babylonian people. Now that we get from Persian records. There are other records as well. So as history is catching up and having more archaeological finds, you have on the right side there, let's see, this was the, what is it called? They had cutesy little names for it. It's like the Rock of Nabonidus or something like that. This is a record from his rule. That little looks like a cylinder, a bread roll on the left. That is the cylinder of Cyrus. So they've unearthed pieces that are from these kings and rulers. And like, oh, so we didn't actually think Darius was a real guy in the Bible. Come to find out, we're doing all this searching and researching and learning, And we think we've narrowed it down to one of the Medo generals that Cyrus had employed to help take over the Babylonians. We're thinking that might have been one of these guys. Let's see, Ugbaru was his name. But then there's other documents that switch the first names, and it was Gubaru. It was funny names. But all of these different individuals are like, this guy was actually given rule of the Babylonian Empire by Cyrus the Great. I mean, Cyrus and his army rolled in and took over, but he just said, hey, good job, general, you take it. And so that could have been Darius, and most likely was. Now, some people have said, well, according to this rock of Nabonidus here, one of those guys had died a couple months later, so that couldn't have been him. But there are multiple guys with these names. So they have 4 different options for who this could have been. But all of a sudden, they're starting to realize that Darius may not have been a, quote, name. It's actually a title. So any one of these guys that actually, he took over for the next number of years under the rule of Cyrus the Great, that's probably this Darius guy that we didn't think existed. We just didn't know it was this guy with a title. So, folks, if anybody gives criticism to biblical archaeology, there is so much information and so many proofs of the Bible. But what do people latch on? The one that doesn't have answers yet. See, the Bible isn't true. Give it about another 20 to 50 years, and they're going to dig up some other rock, like one of these, and I guess that Bible fact that we denied, that's actually proven, my bad. Are they going to publish that loud and clear like they did all of their negativity? Not at all. But don't be surprised, folks. Our God is true, the Bible is true, and eventually society might catch up. But don't hold your breath. I trust the Bible. Don't worry about it. But it's very interesting to read history and to see some of these things unfold. But tonight, we need to step back and get the big picture of what God is communicating from Daniel chapter 5. This guy had an opportunity to drop his pride, humble himself as his grandfather had learned the hard way. And this guy's future might have been very, very different. But because he had a hard heart, held on to his pride, would not learn from the lessons of others, he didn't get any more chances to learn. He's dead, gone, taken out of rule immediately, and the prophecies of God were ushered in. So we ought to learn not only to have a teachable spirit, to look around and pay attention and learn from other people's mistakes, but I would encourage you to take that a step further and pass on some of your lessons to other people, especially the people that you care about. They can avoid things that you had to go through. Pass on some of those crowns and jewels, as is talked about in Proverbs chapter 1, that a parent passes on to their child. Folks, it's not physical wealth. It's wisdom. It's experience. Daniel 5 is reminding us of these facts. So let's turn around and use it, not only personally, but for those around us as well. So for the last 20 minutes, if you would, please go ahead and grab a group. I know we haven't done this for a number of weeks, but if you've got some folks around you that are not typically in your study group or your discussion group, snag them up, invite them in. You've only got 3 questions tonight, and I think they'll be engaging enough. 20 minutes could be easily filled by it.